think one of the biggest frustrations that you can have as a spiritual practitioner or somebody who's doing the inner work is coming into contact with social anxiety. The nature of this work and doing psychospiritual work in general puts you more into an introspective mindset. Why did I act the way that I act? Why did I do the thing that I just did in the way that I did? And it can really buttress a anxious attachment style, which an anxious attachment style is basically an over-attachment to analyzing what's going on in your experience and why you did what you did, and etc., which someone with social anxiety is definitely familiar with. Why did I say that? Oh God, I looked weird in that situation. Low battery. So, yeah. Now, when we do things like Vipassana meditation or self-inquiry and sit for meditation, and then you start taking that out into daily life, it basically it's like adding jet fuel to that already anxious attachment style. And I'm invited to talk about that and how that has sort of unbound itself and brought forth more of a natural confidence and acceptance of the way that I am in social situations. Because I used to try and get away from the fact that I was feeling socially anxious, and I was trying to fix that mechanism and that apparatus. But really it was rooted in a lot of seeking and seeing a lot of imperfections within myself, when in fact it was already perfect. It was already perfect, and it's perfect in you too. But there's an interesting middle way, because if you have social anxiety, you know damn well that it is a fucking nightmare. It can be a nightmare. It can affect you in the workplace. It can affect you in close relationships. And especially when you start peeling off more and more layers of identity, and you start through self-inquiry, through Vipassana meditation practices and stuff like that, you just feel everything. Everything. You feel other people's emotions. You feel belief structures that otherwise would have protected you from feeling an uncomfortable emotion. You feel so say previously, let's say you encountered someone who was angry. Previously, maybe you would have put on a front, and recruited all sorts of beliefs and identities that, you start acting in a certain way. So someone gets mad at you, and then you might default to your smile, and there might be a belief that I can't express anger back at them, because if I do that, I won't get love. So you might feel just like it might manifest as social anxiety, just as an example. It could also be for sadness. It could also be for fear. It could also be for rage. It could also be for joy. Maybe if you've suppressed joy in yourself. So when somebody else exhibits that quality, you default to a different way of being. And the nervous system is very intelligent in the way that it's done this. It's ingenious, actually, because it's a way for us to avoid pain. But spiritual practice, unfortunately, and very fortunately at the same time, brings us back into contact with what's underneath those beliefs and those identities that have accrued to prevent us from feeling the vulnerability of life. So that is a blessing and a curse. So I want to speak to how we can really start stepping away, in a sense, from that anxious attachment style without neglecting it and needing it to go away entirely. And it really is fundamentally an act of trust in this process of unbinding. So if you have any attunement to intuition, if you have any attunement to the fact that you are not your thoughts and you are not your emotions, and what you are has always been here. It's beyond any conceptual framework. It's not bound in time. It's not bound in space. It's eternal, and it's ever present. If you're familiar with self-inquiry, maybe you've had glimpses of this in profound ways, and realize at a fundamental level that you are not your thoughts and you are not your emotions. And yet in daily life, you come into contact with energies like what I've just been describing, and it completely feels like it zonks you out of that, right? So it's like, how do we reliably understand and know ourselves at an embodied deep level that diamond-like pure radiant quality isn't tainted, or quote unquote tainted, in those social situations that seemingly unbind us? How do we maintain that quote unquote view and unbind from this vexing social anxiety? Well, for me, it really is and I listened to a brilliant video from a fella called Josh Putnam from the channel So Awake, and he was talking about authenticity. And he spoke about it in a very pragmatic way that really resonated with me in my experience. And it's like this. Initially, as you start to lean in and you start to trust through practices such as self-inquiry, you start to trust that there is something beyond you, that there is a totally personal, impersonal, and I'm using all these words, but the ever-present awareness is another way to put it. Let's just say that. There is an ever-present awareness that is untainted by any of our mental baggage. And at first you sort of trust it and you can attune to it on the meditation cushion, but then it slowly starts permeating out into daily life, and you start to be able to feel that present awareness that's always been there, that is totally unbound by any concept, and you know it to be very true in your experience. So what you can start to do is you start to take it out into low risk situations, say like shopping for groceries or walking your dog. And you're like, okay, wow, I actually can attune to this. And then what happens? You might go into a social situation and then bam, wham, kazam, you get sucked back into that, like anxious attachment style, like I should feel this, I shouldn't feel this. This is bad that I'm feeling this. Oh God, what are they thinking of me? And totally zapped out of that into mind identification at a very subtle and rapid rate, right? Which can be incredibly frustrating. But I think what that does is it illuminates to us where we're holding on, where we're not putting our full trust into unknowing, unbinding, in God even. You could say God. I've used so many words for this, so let's just, for simplicity's sake, we'll say awareness. That's a very common phrase. You start putting your faith more and more into that, and you realize that when you put your faith into that, surrendering to awareness, surrendering to God, that life takes care of itself. Life really does take care of itself. So in a sense, it is the ultimate antidote to this anxious attachment style and socially anxious frame that we build for ourselves. Because like, when you realize that life takes care of itself without your identity structures, what comes through that when you surrender to that truthful, ever-present awareness or God is your most natural, radiant expression. Who you were as a child before you started layering on concepts and beliefs, and a natural flow, call it like Wu Wei, or effortless action and natural spontaneity comes from that intuitive, unknowing place. But the anxious attachment style has a lot of momentum, and the socially anxious identity has a lot of momentum accrued through our life, that there's a constant like humbling and re-emerging into that place of just how much you start to really appreciate just how strong the forces of delusion are. When you go into like a meditation sitting, then you see how like, wow, I'm really not like, there's no problem, like everything's fine. And yet then you go back into a social situation where it's very deeply conditioned into us to seek validation from other humans. Again, I've heard Angelo Dilullo say not until late stages of realization do does the need for validation really start dropping away. Not until late stages of realization does the need for validation really drop away. And you just see it at more and more subtle levels, in my experience. But simultaneously, there's a deepening of trust in unknowing, in surrendering to awareness, that brings forth this, like, it's like you're living on the edge without there being a concept of time. So, and yeah, it obliterates the anxious attachment style, because you'll still see the thoughts emerging, like, oh, what are they thinking of me? Oh, like, why am I acting in this way? I shouldn't feel this emotion. I should not feel this emotion. I shouldn't feel anger. You can still see all the hardware operating, but then there's just like a surrendering and leaning back to something that's ineffable beyond that just has, like, it's got your back in a way. Total trust. It's like, I think Tony Parsons calls it the beloved for that reason, because it encapsulates everything in your experience with this, like, subtle blanket of love that, like, even if you are anxious, right? Because a socially anxious person who's looking for a solution to get away from anxiety believes that there's something wrong with them and they need to eradicate that program from their system. And there's a middle way here, which I'll talk about in a sec, but there's also, when you are totally enveloped in that love of awareness, it's like, who gives a shit how you show up? Like, if you show up like an anxious wreck, the only one that would care that it's showing up like an anxious wreck is an identity that is being clashed with. So the middle way of that is like, okay, what identities am I how am I trying to show up? What image does this of myself, does this conflict with when I feel anxious and I'm trying to get rid of it? So it's grace in a way, because you're being brute forced, and like, life is like smashing your head up against the wall until you start letting go. You're forced into a natural free fall and letting go of all of the beliefs that are obscuring that natural radiant awareness that's always been there. So it's like freaking grace. Like, thank God we get to come up against this like total heavy contractions of social angst constantly, if this is something that really has been a problem for you, because then you start to see that, like, everything fundamentally, there's no separation. If I start drawing any sense of separation from people, like, oh no, I'm feeling their anxiety now, or I'm feeling their anger, and they're making me anxious. But if there's no separation, which at this level of speaking, why are we still playing this game that we are separate from other people? Just another way the ego holds on. But it's ultimately just energy. So for me, it comes down more and more to just resistance. So like, if there's an energy that is being felt and it's in a social dynamic on the relative sense, then why am I rejecting that emotion? What's wrong with showing that emotion? So there's like a subtle weeding out of patterns in the body that are resisting life as it is, as it's coming forth right now. So feeling social angst, you're looking at someone and you can gently inquire, either during or after the social encounter. And it can be like, just subtly like, okay, I was feeling an uncomfortable charged emotion there, and I could feel the mind's operating system coming online, wanting to get rid of that sensation of like angst or sadness or frustration. What's impure? What is impure about that emotion? Why can't I let myself show that emotion to that person? And what you will meet by using those sorts of inquiries is like old ancient belief structures that say things like, oh, you know, if I show that emotion, then they will reject me. Or if I show that emotion, I'll be seen to be a fraud. Right? So it's this, I feel like there's an immense patience you have to have for this. And I'm always humbled by this because it's an endless free fall. I'm constantly having these sorts of beliefs shown up and put in my face time and time again with different people. Like, some people put me into a very anxious attachment style where I can feel these sorts of resistances and beliefs and identities come online full on. But other people, you know, like, I'm just totally in flow with, and I can just speak effortlessly. But when there's no distinguishing between self and other anymore, and it's just energy, and we're encountering resistance, which really is what's happening. You know, you can play the game of, oh, they have bad energy or they have good energy, but like, it's just fucking energy. So why are we separating ourselves from it anymore? And yeah, so if you're feeling social anxiety and in this process of unbinding, I think it's really reassuring, and I want to give that reassurance to you that, like, it's grace at the end of the day. It's going to suck sometimes, and you're going to feel like maybe even like suicidal at some points. Those thoughts might enter your mind because it's like, well, I just want to feel ease. I just want to feel okay. But ultimately what I think it's forcing us into is more trust into our total natural expression. It goes beyond the people pleaser, the one who wants people to like think that he has it together. It goes beyond the one who like even is attached to the notion of being the one who's socially anxious. It's just total surrender. If you apparently look like a anxious wreck and a sad, neurotic person in a social encounter, that's your fucking truth. Who cares? And then you start just like loving all of those energies into so much, just loving the hell out of them, that really they just stop dropping away. But like you're not looking for that. Like, who cares, right? So it's constantly like this subtle middle way of inquiring into where your identity is still holding on, but also just letting go of the need to do that and letting life just channel through you. Like, you're just a aperture that God is playing his little fingers through, and there's no concept that you can use to describe that. Anyway, that's just a bit of a ramble, but felt moved to talk about it, and I was inspired by Josh Putnam. I encourage you to check out his channel called So Awake. Yeah, released a really good video on authenticity today. Anyway, I'm also doing one-on-one sessions. Check out my website. There's a link in the description, and there's other cool things like teacher resources and writings on there that you might like. So check it out, guys. Much love to you.